So today's episode being about knowledge, wisdom, and experience, I felt like we should do something like that today just because it's something I've been wrestling with personally in my own philosophy, in my own ontology, my study of being, the books that I'm writing. These are concepts that I've been wrestling with for some time now, and I thought it would be appropriate to bring to this channel. And I know you and I have talked a lot about this off camera, but now we should bring it here, talk about the ideas in brief, and we should be good to go. So do you have any ideas to share up front?
As far as it goes with wisdom and knowledge, I think that there's a lot of overlap. I think that sometimes you can be knowledgeable about something but not be very wise because you lack direct experience. Or maybe vice versa. You could be wise about something because somebody happened to have told you a lot about it. And I think wisdom is kind of like, something that we can transfer from one host to another. But at the same time, how wise are you about it if you haven't directly experienced it?
Yeah, those are good questions for sure. Yeah, so for me, it's like, of course, we know what knowledge is, right? Knowledge is like pure data. It's just things that we can come to know. Letters on a page lead to us having factoids in our head.
Sure.
It's hot outside. That's some knowledge that I have about some state that actually exists in reality. Wisdom is more like what comes with the experience, right? So like I know it's hot outside. That's based on my knowledge. And then based on my knowledge that if I, maybe the fire is hot, and if I touch the fire, then it hurts, right? To switch gears from outside to fire quickly. Right. And if I touch the fire, it hurts. And through my wisdom, my experiences, I incorporate the knowledge with the wisdom and know through knowledge again that I shouldn't touch the fire.
Right.
Right. And so this whole difference and dichotomy between like what is wisdom and what is knowledge, it's kind of a conversation that has been going on for centuries, but it's kind of like nobody talks about it because it's just self-evident, right, at this point. But I still like to unpack it and think about it.
Yeah, well, I think with wisdom, it's more something that's embodied. And knowledge is more something that you can elucidate from one party to another. But, when it's hot outside and I bring a bottle of water with me because it's hot, it's not really something I'm thinking about. It's just that it's a reinforced response to hotness that I know that I'm going to need water more likely than if it's cold.
Right. But you only know that because of your experiences that you've had.
Right.
Right. And using those experiences, you gain wisdom if you like actually pay attention to them and convert the knowledge that you have through, I guess, the aperture of your experience, I guess like the crucible of your experience, which is like you're kind of like mixing things into a cauldron, and then out comes knowledge of how you should live your life, right? Knowledge of how you should behave, or, what you should think or say. Like, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that because I'm going to get punched in the face, and then I'm going to have to have like a fight in the middle of the street right now. Or, oh, maybe if I do this thing, then I'll die, so I don't do that thing.
Well, and one of the reasons why I said that there's a lot of overlap between knowledge and wisdom is because I do believe that you can be more wise when it pertains to a certain subject if somebody who has had direct experience with such topics or such experiences has given it to you. You're going to be more wise. Like for example, before I started really experimenting with psychedelics, I was listening to Terrence McKenna all day long, every day.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I had a lot of knowledge about psychedelics, but I lacked the direct experience. But I felt that because I had that knowledge, when I went into the experience, I knew how to operate within it in a way that was more wise.
Right, like you were more equipped to handle it. Yeah, so we should definitely come back to that, right? Like the utility of telling people things and recording your knowledge and all of that. But I guess now that the introduction's kind of done, what I kind of want to talk about is like what is knowledge and what is wisdom, right? It's like are there different parts of our brains? Is it like different parts of our psychology? Where does this stuff come from? Because when you look at a scientifically minded individual like a positivist, or someone who's just like empirical about everything, they tend to look at the world through lenses in which they really only care about the knowledge, right? It's like knowledge is this sort of like dead, objective thing where you're not necessarily making value judgments or anything based on that data. It's just data. It's just raw information. And knowledge is sort of like a human brain or an intellect coming to understand these points and then just like ingesting them and remembering them through their memory banks, right?
Right.
And then wisdom kind of, it's almost like if you're looking at a ruler and we're going to measure how far in our human capacity knowledge exists at, I guess, knowledge is like an inch in and wisdom might be like 2 inches in, because almost wisdom to me is like an emergent pattern that requires higher faculties of thought and hardware to allow those processes to occur for us to actually be able to have wisdom than the processes and hardware required to obtain knowledge.
Right. So would you agree with me when I said that wisdom is oftentimes something that's embodied because it's subconscious? It's not necessarily something that you know that you do because it's the best way to go about doing such a thing. It's just something that is.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's almost like wisdom can't look at itself. Wisdom has to look at itself through the intellect.
That's a good way to say it.
Through knowledge.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the bicameral mind or something.
Yeah.
I always reference Kabbalah all the time, which is Judaic mysticism. And there's that meditation running with the lightning.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we'll do like a lecture series about basic Kabbalistic concepts, so I don't have to get into it so deeply right now. But basically, long story short, it's Bina consciousness and Hakma consciousness on the tree of life. When you look at the tree of life in the Kabbalistic texts, God, or like the Godhead, or the light of the human intellect shines down and kind of like splits into multiple attributes, right? Or like multiple emanations of like one whole human light, which is this beautiful thing. And it breaks into a section which like has no language processing, no boundaries, sort of like as you look at the world, you can't see the trees from the forest.
Right.
It's very artistic. It's very like, what is it, right brain? Isn't it? Uberboya would always talk about it as in the right brain.
Right, the right brain is the unconscious.
Right, it's the unconscious, and it doesn't have language, and it doesn't communicate in conventional ways. And much of the knowledge that it houses in the wisdoms are abstractions, are abstract. But it's funny because in the Kabbalistic text, that wisdom principle kind of comes before Bina, which is the language processing machinery. It's what allows us to like separate things and use processes of reductionism to actually come to know anything. And so if we use reductive processes, if for anyone who's listening, reductionism is kind of like taking anything that you can think of and bringing it down to more and more simple parts in order to understand the larger thing by going to the simpler thing first and then working your way back up. So through this Kabbalistic principle and process, we start with wisdom, almost like non-local, very abstract, not using language, right-brainness. And then all of a sudden in that doctrine, it switches over to the language processor, which comes after, in order to then look back at it objectively through language processing in order to reduce it in a way where we can actually hold it in our hands, because it's so abstract. Without these processes of reduction, it's just like trying to catch smoke or like trying to capture the whole ocean in a little cup.
Right.
And the process of the brain, which allows us to use language and these processes of reduction, is like grabbing a bunch of little cups, or like grabbing a bunch of little nets and then separating it until we can contain it in its separate pieces. And then we can look at it objectively and be like, oh, okay, like I understand this now. I caught it. I've contained this whole thing, this weird abstraction. The reason why I bring all this up is because I just said that knowledge comes before wisdom in the way that we have to interface with wisdom, but it's almost like wisdom in that, at least in the Kabbalistic doctrine, comes first in how human beings came to know themselves,
right? Which
doesn't really make a lot of sense. And maybe a lot of the audience doesn't care about Kabbalah at all, but I do, so I brought it up.
Well, I think sometimes wisdom too comes first because it's something that you act out because it's culturally reinforced. Your parents are going to act in such a way that allowed them to propagate in the first place and become these successful people who had offspring and whatnot. And you're going to watch that behavior, and you're going to kind of act it out because that's a wise thing to do. It's wise to act out the things that people do that are successful.
And that's not done with like language. You don't have to think about that.
Right.
That's almost like first nature, right? So if language did come beyond or like after our animalistic processes, and then wisdom, quote unquote, in how we look at it through our language came even further in time, maybe like wisdom in a general sense is actually before knowledge.
And it kind of makes sense that would be true because animals don't necessarily have this like wide array of knowledge that they can tell you or they can pick apart, but they do act out things that are beneficial for their survival without really even needing to talk about it like we're doing now.
Right. Yeah. So maybe that is true. Actually. Yeah. So, I mean, I've always had this complex of looking at wisdom as this sort of emergent process that comes after knowledge and from knowledge as like a stepping stone or a foundational building block. But really, wisdom, at least in the way that I'm talking about it right now, this abstract definition of wisdom being this sort of like metaphysical, arbitrary human quality is at the foundation of all animals.
Right.
Is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just makes, and they're not thinking twice about what they do, but it's the most effective way for them to do what they do in their niche.
So it's kind of like a self-referential process. So a lot on this channel, I will end up talking about Kurt Gödel and Hofstadter and, Gödel Escher Bach, which is an amazing book. And self-referential processes is metaphysics and my ontology unfold, and I talk about the nature of reality.
But real quick, though, then again, there had to have been some point in history where an animal in their niche, when they were forced to change in some way, none of them knew what they were doing, but they just so happened to have done everything right. And so it's almost like, is that knowledge that they're passing down to their offspring, or is that wisdom?
That's a really good question. So I'll benchmark the whole self-referential thing for a second, but maybe, there's a lot of woo-woo around this, like epigenetics or like weird genetic memory that we don't quite understand yet.
They've recently done a study where they showed that these certain types of worms, they could train them to react a certain way to a specific scent, and then have like 12 generations go by where they don't introduce them to that scent, and then they introduce the scent to the 12th generation, and they give the same response.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And
it was on a legit science magazine.
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know, man. And it's kind of similar to like Rupert Sheldrake's idea of the morphic resonance.
Yeah, like if you train a group of rats to do a certain maze in Massachusetts, and then have a group of rats in London do the same maze, they'll be able to do it better than if no rats had ever done that maze.
Right. Like for the first time ever, these rats completed this maze through Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance field, which is a very woo pseudoscientific concept, but some pocket in space and time, these rats share like a collective mind in which that knowledge, that experiential knowledge goes to, and rats super far away, halfway across the globe, will figure it out faster.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I guess that's the ultimate question then. If is there wisdom that is innate that you don't need to be taught, that is just built into either our biology, or if we're going to use like a woo-woo term, it's like the ancestral memory, or...
Right, totally. Yeah, good question.
Because that gets me thinking about archetypes. There are I think we do have a natural urge to be heroic and be moral.
Yeah, and there's all these archetypes. So that's going to be another huge lecture episode for anybody listening.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Archetypes are all around us, and they sort of control the construct in ways where it doesn't matter what the flavor of the experience is. There's these like overarching motifs, like recurring symbols that are always penetrating those experiences, regardless of how they're unfolding in your life. Like, oh, I'm holding a book, or I'm having a conversation with a person, or I'm in this loving relationship, like, or I'm experiencing pain. Whatever the thing is happening, usually you can look at sort of like a larger picture of what's actually occurring. And there are these like motifs that happen across all of humanity, and those are the archetypes. Yep. So it's like if the archetypes are older than us, more ancient than us, larger than us, that we like exist within, do we tap into those things? Do we obtain knowledge without our knowing? Are there things that we know that we don't know?
Right.
These are all huge questions.
Right.
Huge questions. So that actually, I do want to talk about that. But first, I just want to come back over here to the self-referential process. What I'm meaning to say is this circular process, which my train of thought might be losing a lot of people out here. So I'll just run through it really quick and we'll move on. But it's sort of like, if knowledge came before wisdom, but in truth, wisdom came before a set series of process where our biological brains could obtain and store and think about knowledge. Then that knowledge references itself through its own process of knowledge and words to think about itself enough and to think about its own behaviors enough to stem wisdom, which wisdom was before knowledge, but now wisdom's after knowledge too, in like a different form, kind of. Like,
And then the universe just explodes.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, the universe is like constantly evolving, and everything is constantly changing, becoming more and more nuanced. So, like, wisdom came first, but then knowledge came, but then wisdom came, and then wisdom and knowledge together, like, in sort of a union of opposites type deal, then transcend into something even further beyond. And so it's like crazy self-referential looping processes, and I just wanted to highlight that because it's a huge recurring symbol in everything that I read, that I study, and the books that I want to talk about and my
And so a
personal
reductionist
philosophy.
might come in and just say, well, then that means that they're just human constructs, and we're trying too hard to label things that are all part of the same process. How would you respond?
Well, I have a whole entire thing to say to any reductionist that tries to come at me sideways and say that.
No, I'm just saying, like, in that specific objection of the idea that, well, wisdom and knowledge are they go hand in hand. They're really not these separate entities.
I don't know if you could say that for sure. We'd have to do some deep dives into some,
I agree.
Some psychological literature to first look at actually the nature of psychology and how our minds operate. But again, through like Ken Wilber's equal system, through integral theory, we kind of have to look at it from all spectrums.
Agreed.
And if a reductionist comes at you sideways saying like, okay, this thing that you're positing is pseudoscience, there's no evidence for this, you're ridiculous, this can only occur because you have brain waves and brain patterns or a body to help you do this, like knowledge didn't come before wisdom. How can wisdom come before knowledge? Because your brain didn't exist. But we were talking about archetypes and other weird, different sort of metaphysical concepts. So, I mean, it would be hard to have a real rational discussion like that. You would kind of have to set the boundaries and almost step back and define things and start even further down than we did in this conversation.
Maybe we should, real quick, just for the viewers, give maybe a BJ differentiation between wisdom and knowledge, if you could distill it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, okay, wisdom would be like Gnosis. This is a concept from Hermeticism and alchemy called Gnosis. It's spelled Gnosis. And it basically means things that you come to know through direct experience, right? So there's that word, experience. And usually that can be knowledge, right? It's knowledge gained from direct experience. But the knowledge that's gained from direct experience, I would call wisdom, almost, in its most basic sense. Honestly, wisdom is almost what does emerge out of the process of directly experiencing something and then thinking about it through a self-relative, self-causal, sort of like self-referential reflection.
But we have this thing called, empathy and imagination. So is it still wisdom if somebody else who's had direct experience gives it to me, like tells me what happened to them?
So I mean, is it still direct experience if someone else is telling you? No. That would be knowledge that you have obtained. So I'm glad you asked that question.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what I'm getting at. So like if you give birth to a child, if you're a woman who gives birth and you feel the pain and you've been pregnant and you ate all the foods and you did all the appointments and you did everything right and you gave birth, like you know what it is like to give birth, right? So that is Gnosis.
Right.
No man will ever have Gnosis of actually giving birth to a child.
Right.
We live in the 21st century, so maybe someone wants to argue with me on that. But genetically male-born cisgender males will never give birth.
Right.
But men can study. They can gain as much knowledge as possible. They can listen and use their intellect and their reason.
Yeah. There's even those little. Have you ever seen the videos where they put the pain
simulator?
I'm sure that doesn't even come close, to be honest.
No, probably not.
Yeah.
Usually anything that's simulated sucks, man.
Right.
Imagine like masturbation with like sex toys
trying
and then
to show somebody
like this is what it's like to have sex.
Exactly.
Or like you buy a sex doll and it's like blowjob action.
Yeah, and it's nothing.
You're just like it
doesn't even give you an intimation.
Yeah, it's like not even close. Not that I would know through my Gnosis and actual experience. I've never bought a sex doll or penetrated a sex doll
or a flashlight or anything.
Yeah, I've never actually used anything like that. So maybe we actually can't speak on this because we don't actually have that experience.
Because there's got to be some guy out there who's like, no, man, it's just like
just the same. It's better, bro.
Oh, that's funny.
Man. Yeah. So I mean, on that same line, though, I mean, a doctor can spend his whole life like studying and gaining as much knowledge as they can secondhand and practicing and learning through trial and error and reading books and watching things, listening and using their discernment and their reason, which is another higher faculty aspect of the human intellect, other than our animalistic like natural tendency. And using that knowledge, we can give birth to babies.
Right.
Like, and most of the time, men who have never actually experienced giving birth, a lot of the time are more equipped and, I guess, have the credentials to give birth to babies.
Right.
You could have given birth to 7 babies, and you probably still won't necessarily know everything that you need to know in order to deliver a child.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So there is something to be said about knowledge and wisdom, and knowledge and direct experience through Gnosis, and this sort of like trinity of how they all play into each other to create a wholly individuated and actualized person is so important to integrate all of them. And the reason why I wanted to do this episode today is because I see all the time on social media, people are like, oh, you've never experienced that. Like, you have no idea what you're talking about. You should be quiet.
Right.
Like, you can't join the conversation. You're not black. So, like, you don't know black struggles. Right. So you can't talk to me about anti-racism.
That was my point, that we have this thing called an imagination. So, like, yeah, I have no direct experience with it, but I can imagine what it's like to be oppressed or to be profiled.
And the more experience that you have had in your life leading up to that point of using your intellect, reason, and imagination, the closer that you can potentially get to the actual Gnosis itself.
Right.
Like, yes, you will never actually obtain that true experiential knowledge, that true wisdom, but you can get as close as possible, good enough for government work, in order to become a doctor and deliver a baby.
Sure.
Or to become a civil rights activist and actually speak on the behalf of a minority or anybody who's been oppressed or whatever,
right.
even if you maybe have never been oppressed. And so this idea that we have to experience something in order to join the conversation is something that I really wanted to tackle in this episode, and that I'll reiterate again in the future. But that's pretty much the reasoning behind why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah. Do you think, I think the interesting thing about knowledge and wisdom, at least as far as what it means to be a human, is that you can't live without one or the other. You know, you can have all the wisdom in the world and know how to, respond to certain situations in real time, but unless you take the time to study, which is something that you talked to me about earlier, you're never going to make it in modern day society. So you need both. It's not like one is better than the other. That's not what we're trying to say. We're just trying to say that there's utility in both, and whether you're conscious of it or not, you're always accruing wisdom and knowledge. Just
exactly.
Interfaces.
Yeah, to bring it back to the union of opposites.
Right.
If people think of knowledge and wisdom as opposites, often they do, even though knowledge and ignorance may be true opposites.
Right.
Or like wisdom and folly or whatever. But ultimately, we should try to integrate them both and understand that they both have a place. And there is that thing, that like experience, which sort of is like the glue in between them both. You have to have an experience in order to have any knowledge. And some people argue with that, right? Pause. Some people argue and say, a priori knowledge or posteriori knowledge, the whole like Kantian metaphysics, Kantian epistemology of like what can we know and what can't we know.
Right.
It's like, can there be things that we know without direct experience? And ultimately Kant kind of proves that. But at the end of the day, when you really scrutinize it, you still have to have a brain and ears and eyes to have heard words, to see things, to have concepts in your head that allow you to reason out that knowledge can exist without experience. Like, in the domain of that conversation, knowledge can exist without experience, but in a greater domain of reference, in a greater sort of like entire picture of the human experience, you have to have had an experience in order to get to that point. So you kind of need everything all at once.
Right.
Well,
that's funny because this was your idea to talk about this. But yesterday, before you asked me about this, Jake Noel texted me, and shout out to Jake Noel. He has a YouTube channel called Unveiling the Sacred. It's awesome.
We'll link it in the description for everybody.
We'll link it in the description. He texted me and he was like, we can philosophize and we can talk about life, but is talking about life really the same as living life?
Right.
And which is better?
Yeah, a lot of people say like, it's like the old cliche, oh, you can get all the knowledge you want in reading a book. You can, look at all the countries in the world on a map, but until you actually travel the world, really, you're not really living.
Right.
And it's sort of that age-old argument, which is kind of what I meant to say in the very beginning when I almost like boorishly brought up this whole topic.
No, I think it's been good. I think the place where we need to be is just balance, right? Like
balance always. Back to the union of opposites, back to like equal, back to Wilber's integral philosophy. Like shout outs to all of that in every episode possible, just because.
Now I have something to say about people who teach, actually, because it's one thing to know something, whether it's embodied wisdom or some knowledge that you've accrued, but it's another thing to teach it to somebody else. And we live in the era where everybody's a guru, everybody's a teacher. You go on YouTube, you get an advertisement for some guy who tells you that you can make $1 million if you follow his method or whatever. There's that guy Dan Blazarian, who basically is like a fraud.
Charlatans, man.
Yeah, he convinced all these people that he was a guru and said he was super rich, but he really wasn't.
Yeah.
Now, the weird thing about it, though, is that his method did make some people rich.
Yeah.
So, like,
weird.
Is it okay to, if you don't live by something that you know to be true, do you really have the authority to offer knowledge to people about that particular subject?
Yeah, that's a really good question, man. And to say really quick, I mean, it's the age of the information, right? Information age. There's a lot of woo-woo out there.
Mm-hmm.
We have a Union of Opposites episode, actually, that we talk about, old dogmatic religions versus the New Age. And we kind of had this discussion a little bit, too, about the nature of...
Link in the description.
Yeah, check it out. The nature of the information age to cause a lot of confusion to where people can take advantage of people.
Yep.
Like, there's always been charlatans. There's always been cults that emerge. There's always been liars and cheats and people who use positions of power and religious doctrines or otherwise. This guy kind of used the internet and economics and other cultural tools to rise to power through their being charlatans. But that's a little segue or like a little caveat there. But we have to pay attention to what is actually happening, right? That you may not have that direct experiential knowledge, but you can on purpose teach something about that thing, just the same way with doctors, male doctors who've never given birth. They can teach everything about babies and talk all about pain mediation and anesthesia and how to put people to sleep and how to deliver a baby properly, but they've never actually
they might
delivered
faint
a
when
baby.
they see that baby crowning.
Yeah.
They don't know. They're not emotionally equipped to deal with it or whatever.
Maybe in the first few times, right? But then that's like a whole nother different thing.
Right.
I kind of just got like a hilarious image there.
Sorry.
No, you're good. But yeah, I mean, we truly should listen to people for the advice that they espouse if the advice itself is wise, right? So again, there you go, the difference between knowledge and wisdom. That guy was a charlatan. He was a liar. He wasn't rich.
His company was tanking.
Totally fabricated.
But yet some people, oddly enough, happened to follow his steps, which probably he didn't follow. If they're getting successful off of it.
Exactly. Or maybe there were some other factors that were missed, but for the most part, I agree. Maybe you can espouse knowledge that you do not yourself actually embody, or practices or behaviors or whatever, even mental states.
Right.
And you yourself have never experienced them, but you can still talk about them with some degree of certainty, because there is this interplay between knowledge, the intellect, reason, experience, and wisdom.
Right.
And it's a whole spectrum in between, and they all sort of are touching on like real truth, right? Big T truth, objective reality, if you buy into such a thing as objective reality. But they're all playing their parts, right? And so you don't need every single one of them to touch the fibers of truth.
I would say that if you are waiting for somebody to learn from who never deviates from that which they teach, you'll never learn at all.
Right. It's kind of like waiting for perfection. It's kind of like on this channel, right? We were like, oh, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be perfect before we start. And it's like, dude, if you wait for perfection, you're never going to start.
Right. Eminem actually has a really good line about it in one of his verses. He's his whole career, he's chasing the perfect verse. It's a terrible song. It's one of my least favorite Eminem songs. But the concept is really good. He's trying to attain this perfect verse, and then he comes to this inevitable realization that such a thing is not possible.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, totally. So what you just said about, if you wait for the perfect teacher or you wait for the perfect individual to espouse some ideology or truth or something for you to follow them, like a true Jesus figure, really, you're never going to go anywhere, just like ever. And the reason why I kind of bring up this whole idea of knowledge and wisdom is because Ken Wilber, who created integral theory and kind of, coined integral philosophy, AQAL, equal, and everything that we talk about on this channel, he created a map of consciousness and a map of like spiritual growth and attainment that goes from the very basic and the most debased individual sort of like dead matter level,
right?
Inanimate matter, all the way up to supreme consciousness. And he sort of maps it out in a way that you really can see it and understand it. And you can kind of almost like look at your values and look at your behaviors and see where you are on that spectrum, even like color codes it and everything. Just like every other philosopher in the postmodern world are trying to create unified theories that link together everything. He kind of did the same thing. But I do respect his efforts, and he gets a lot of criticism and flack from people because they say, oh, he wore a tanked... He used to work out a lot. He used to be really buff, And like he was big on going to the gym and just being fit and he was an attractive young man.
Right.
You know, he's older now.
He didn't wear a suit. He wore a tank top so he could show off those muscles.
Yeah, he did. You know, Lex Fridman podcast, he wears a suit. Joe Rogan, he kind of wears like astronaut suits, whatever. Duncan Trussell wears ghillie suits. Who cares, right? Yeah. But they're all kind of either being formal like Lex or funny like Joe. Otherwise, they just are regular dudes wearing regular clothes.
Yeah, but Joe Rogan's not going to give a lecture on metaphysics. He's just talking.
He's just talking to dudes. Yeah. So maybe that is a good difference, right? Like Ken Wilber created a school of enlightenment almost in which people would flock to from all parts of the world.
Right.
He was even endorsed by
But he pulled up with a protein shake and a barbell in one hand.
Yeah, or, you know, he just wears tank top and flexes muscles on camera while he kind of talks about metaphysics or whatever, or like how you should rightly live. And so he got a lot of criticism for that. People are like, oh, he's a narcissist. He puts his face on the cover of all of his books. You know, it's all about him, and you shouldn't listen to what he has to say because he's a narcissist. Well, whether or not he does love himself more than anyone else, the ideas that he was saying were absolute gold. The things that he was giving to humanity, how to live your life rightly, what you should focus on, how to become, you know, better, was just true. He was speaking the truth, regardless of whether or not he looks at himself too much in the mirror or cares too much about what other people think about him. We're all human beings, and we all are going to have our quirks and our caveats and all of our like problems that riddle us, consciously or otherwise. And so people in today's day and age, and I think forever, it's not just a characteristic trait of today, but human beings in general seem to like to overly generalize people or things, and then they place them into bags that are other than them, and they just don't like them for that particular reason. And then they throw the baby out with the bathwater, and everything is out the window, and they don't want to listen at all.
Right.
And that's kind of what I wanted to highlight as well. And you brought it up perfectly with the whole...
It's kind of like an issue with like religion too. Like religion has done a lot of good in people's lives. It's been the number one method to prevent addiction or alleviate the plight of addiction. Yet people will look at what institutions have done with religion and say, like, well, let's just throw it all out because one group of individuals decided to corrupt it or use it for as a mechanism for control. It's also a more relevant to the time issue is the Peterson issue.
Yeah,
it's like
definitely.
Jordan Peterson has done a lot in the hearts and the minds of young men everywhere to make their lives better and make them adopt responsibility and really step outside of themselves. And it's almost as if whenever something good comes, and Jordan Peterson's not perfect by any means. Me and BJ both have different critiques of him, but we know he's done a lot of good. And there's this group of haters. It's like in any situation who are just waiting.
True haters.
Like, who are just waiting for you to deviate from your teaching or to make one misstep so they can say, ha, you're a fraud. And so that's what they've done with Peterson is, you know, he was prescribed by a doctor benzodiazepines. He didn't really know much about him, although he probably should have because he was a psychologist.
Clinical psychologist. I'm sure he knew, but they don't, I'm sure he knew.
But they've used that to say, well, how can I follow these 12 rules from a guy who can't even stay off of drugs?
Yeah. Maybe he knew the risks, but again, he had knowledge of the risks.
Right.
But he didn't have experiential gnosis to give him the wisdom that he should not take these drugs, or maybe he had a proclivity within himself to become addicted to these things, and maybe he has knowledge that they're addictive. Maybe he has knowledge that he has, you know.
Well, he also said that I'm the type of person who is not always innately good, and I actually have a high proclivity to have pathology. So
sure.
It's not like it's a surprise. It's like when Louis C.K. only talks about masturbating on stage, and then everyone is so surprised when he. You know what I mean? It's like, but I guess that deviates from the point a little bit. But
that moves us into cancel culture. But we don't have to talk.
We don't have to go
today.
there. We have plenty of time to talk about cancel culture. But I don't understand why people. It's in Alan Watts too, right?
Yeah, he used to drink a lot.
Yep.
And I think he like drank and ate himself into a really unhealtly bodily state.
Heart disease, right?
Like right before he died. Yeah.
Was that it?
I think I mean, I don't know exactly why he died, but he definitely was really unhealthy in his older years.
But I've learned a lot from listening to Alan Watts.
Yeah.
I mean,
Alan Watts even makes the point too, man. He makes the point that, you know, your gurus are going to smoke cigarettes. They're going to have sex. They're going to be human beings. And that like the ascetic path where you truly, truly try to reject the entirety of the world in order to find enlightenment is one way to do it, but it's not the only way. There's something called the middle path. And the Jews, the reason why I'm so big on Kabbalah and Judaism is because they really adopt this sort of idea about like doing everything within moderation. It's not about like, oh, don't have sex or don't do drugs necessarily, or like don't drink or don't do this or that.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a lot of restrictions in that culture, but but like when it comes to living rightly as a person, it's just about finding balance and not necessarily going one way or the other to like complete hedonism or like complete stoic like asceticism.
I also don't think there's a one-size-fits-all when it comes to knowledge and wisdom as it pertains from going from one individual to another. Because
Right.
I have a friend who's schizophrenic, and I've seen the way that he acts when he smokes pot. And so I tell him frequently, anytime he's thinking he wants to do it, I say, don't do it, because it's not good for you. You have a proclivity, and you have this thing about you that makes it a bad reaction. But if I'm at a party and someone is smoking pot, I might smoke it. But
Right.
it's just different for me.
And you have to have that.
It's still wise that I'm telling him not to do that.
Sure. Yeah. Like we can have wisdoms that we haven't earned yet, and we can have knowledge that we haven't earned yet. But there's this ancient saying, I don't know where it came from, but it's like be weary or like be critical of wisdom, of unearned wisdom.
Yep. Carl Jung.
Carl Jung said that?
He was actually talking about psychedelics. He said, beware of wisdom you did not earn.
Right, wisdom that you didn't earn. Because psychedelic, like, and Ken Wilber, okay, so to bring it back to Wilber really quick and Jung, Wilber talks about, the states and stages of humankind. And, the states are like the stages are like the highest, like the truth. Like I am at a stage in my life in which I do this, and this, and these are my problems and these are my neuroses. If I level up one stage, then these will be my general archetypal characteristics. If I level up another stage, and so he kind of maps it out to where if you're like this color at this stage, this is the way you behave, this is the way you think for the most part.
Right.
And then you level it up all the way. And people criticize him, and I didn't finish the idea before, but people criticize him because they're like, you're not an enlightened being to the uppermost level. Like you're not Jesus. You're a person who's a narcissist, right? How can a narcissist be at Jesus level? So he doesn't necessarily have like the experiential gnosis of the highest levels, but he can still have a knowledge and wisdom of those highest levels through an amalgamation of experiences and knowledge data points where he's sort of like put them all together integrally, which emerge a level of awareness and understanding as if like, oh, I can see it over there. Like, oh, I can see that woman giving birth over there. Now I'm aware of it. Now I can understand huge aspects of it that I never knew before. Doesn't necessarily mean I am there, but at least I can see it, map it out, talk about it, teach it, do all the stuff with it. And that's kind of where Wilber was at. Wilber talks about states and stages. Carl Jung says, and states. So those were stages, right?
Yep.
Like the actual hardcore hardwiring of who you are,
and
how you are.
And you think the stages are more real than the states?
So people will, in his system, the stages are more quote unquote real. They're more tangible. They're more like long lasting. The longevity of stages are like what you are right now.
But states are fluid because I'm hungry for 1 minute, but then I eat and I'm not hungry anymore.
Exactly. States are fluid. So when people take something like a psychedelic or they have a near-death experience or a meditative experience or some religious experience, whatever, and they get a glimpse of this like other reality that they could have never fathomed before. They get a taste for it. Now it's sort of akin to the metaphor of like, oh, you saw the child being birthed, so now you have some knowledge. You have some wisdom of the whole process. You can obtain higher states of consciousness, but you're always going to fluidly fall back down into the stage in which you are currently at for the work that you've done in your life up to that point.
Right.
And so Carl Jung says, be aware of wisdom gained unearned. Right. Unearned wisdom, like loosely. We'll find the quote and we'll throw it up.
It's something like that.
But Wilber would say the same in that, like, the psychedelic will give you a taste, but mostly if you're not ready to integrate that experience, back to the word integrate, integral, if you're not ready to integrate it and truly do the work in your real life afterwards, the psychedelic will only serve to be a neurotic demon in your life, because it'll give you these glimpses and you'll have knowledge now of those realms, but you won't have the wisdom or the discernment of how to actually take that experience and work it into your day-to-day life to transcend and emerge through evolutionary processes into a better person.
Right. And it's not to say that psychedelics aren't a beautiful thing, but there, and I hate to say this, but there is a guy out there, an anecdotal story where he did 5 ayahuasca ceremonies in 7 days and he jumped off a cliff a week later.
Yeah, and you have to be really careful with that. Since we're segueing like really quick, and let's swerve back, we can do more episodes about psychedelics for sure. But
it's a good example for what we're talking about, because I mean, a psychedelic is actually the perfect example, because it's one of those things that,
or even the benzo. If not psychedelics, the benz, right? So like Jordan Peterson gets hooked on benzos, And then, they bring him down to a lower state of consciousness. But his stage of his entire being, the things that he's developed, the things that he's created, himself as an actual individual, the family he's built, the riches, the success, the books he's written, he's obviously a very advanced individual.
Sure.
And on multiple spectrums. I mean, he has his own clinical psychology work. He's a professor. He can teach, obviously. He's a great orator. He can speak in front of crowds. Like, he is a very advanced individual.
Yes.
And yet, when he takes the bends, he becomes a lower state of he finds himself slipping into a lower state of consciousness that actually developed a neurotic tendency and overtook his life, overtook his ability to do all of the things. Yeah, like truly just overtook everything. And that can go in any direction. Psychedelics, drugs, all of the experiences that you could potentially have. You can obtain states up or down which will riddle you and become more powerful in your life than your actual stage. And so there's this sort of duality that Wilber talks about in becoming a more holistic individual, where you kind of have to balance, okay, I use this drug as a tool to obtain a state, but then when I come back down, inevitably I'm going to have to work that into my real world in order to level up my stage in truth. And it's sort of like this juggling act. And I'm sure that this terribly negative experience in which Jordan Peterson recently went through is going to help him do the work in his real life to ascend even further and become even more evolved as an individual. And from a state down, it's not always a state up, or it doesn't have to always be up. States down can help too, and that's why integrating experiences and integrating opposites is so important to me and us.
Yeah, we wouldn't have cliche phrases like take one step back to take two steps forwards if it didn't have some
true
semblance of truth in the way that things manifest. So
that leads me to the question of whether or not we can take advice from others or even learn from others, meaningful knowledge or wisdom, when those people are tyrants or terrible human beings or evil or whatever. Because, if you can learn from states up or states downwards, we should also say that you can learn, just as we did earlier, you can learn from people who don't necessarily have the experiential gnosis, the knowledge of the things that they're talking about, like doctors giving birth. But we can still learn from those guys, right? And we can also learn from gurus who don't necessarily take their own advice all the time. But can we learn, or should we try to learn from people who are evil, who do wrong?
Well, I mean, I would argue that we, first of all, as a society, we already do that.
Sure.
Hitler invented the 40-hour work week. We still implement that. We still acquiesce to it, even though Hitler was a tyrant and a murderer and a genocidal maniac. But on another level, like, I learn a lot from people who are on the lower echelon of society. Homeless people is what I'm referring to.
Oh,
because
just use the common speak.
Yeah,
use the common tongue.
Yeah,
the upper the lower echelon.
The lower echelon of the homeless people, or even just people who are just lack depth, but yet they have these specific set of life experiences that you can learn from. And I've met people who act in a way that's not desirable, but they tell you that you shouldn't. So that's good. That's wisdom. That they know best that you shouldn't act that way, because they acted that way for so long that led them to this circumstance that they're in. Yeah,
it's kind of like you had that experience. I don't know if we even talked about it on an episode or not, but you had that experience of like two girls jumping in your Uber.
Oh yeah.
And they were obviously drug addicts.
Yep.
And maybe even like solicited sex for money and stuff. Yeah,
like it talks about robbing people and
terrible people,
terrible things, but even though it seemed like from my, limited brief interaction with them, they knew what they did was wrong, but one of the girls said like, oh well, my life is so bad that I'm just going to keep doing it. I don't want to internalize. I'd rather be high all the time. And
that's such a huge topic of conversation. We should do another episode.
Sure. But
flag that.
But I bet you if I asked that girl straight up, which I wouldn't have because I was working at the time, but and probably I wouldn't do it anyway. But if I would have asked her like, hey, do you like, what would you say to somebody who was younger in your shoes who was maybe going to try methamphetamine for the first time? I guarantee you that those people would tell them not to.
Yeah, most of the time, yeah.
Right?
So I get what you're trying to say. You're saying like, even if you're like the scourge of the earth, not saying that drug addicts or like hookers or even murder, I'm not trying to judge people right now, but even if you are claimed by consensus to be the scourge of the earth, then you still have some level of knowledge and wisdom that you can give to people that is meaningful, that other people should probably heed.
I think sometimes they have more.
Yeah.
Because they've done all these, made all these terrible decisions that gave them direct experience of the consequences themselves.
And that's, and then if we had discernment and if we were more wise as people, we would take their advice.
Right.
But then there comes into the question of like, are they lying to me to get me to do something bad? Like, that's a whole nother level. But if we take what they're saying at face value, that, okay, this person is actually trying to give me good advice and not with an ulterior motive, because I wouldn't put that above them, because they're terrible people.
Yep.
For whatever they're
lower echelon.
Yeah, at lower echelon. We're so high up, upper echelon.
I'm not saying I'm the highest.
Where's my cigar?
Yeah.
Where's my pipe?
And
actually,
my slippers.
I need my monocle.
Yeah. I left my Gucci slippers inside.
Oh, Gucci. Yeah.
We might have to bleep that.
Don't bleep it. It's all good.
All right.
People know we're just two guys. I mean, we're just two guys.
We're
just kicking it.
Not in the upper or the lower echelon, but
what is an echelon?
Right.
What even is that?
Is that a unit of measurement?
Don't talk to the reductionists.
Right. We won't ask them.
Don't talk to your science friends about that. They won't know. Or they will, but they'll pretend like they don't, because it doesn't fit into their models. Can you measure that, bro? If you can't measure it, it's not real.
Do you have a source for that?
That was the best. That was the best one. Okay. So
back on track.
What were we even saying?
We were talking about people who have made bad decisions, and therefore they would probably be very likely to tell you that those decisions aren't
right. So you should listen to those
path.
people.
Yeah.
You really should listen to those people, truly, if they're honestly giving you good advice for good reasons. But I guess what I'm more getting at is like the cancel culture aspect of it, in which, maybe this guy makes this amazing comedy sketch and you're an aspiring comedian, or like he has his own TV show, like Rick and Morty, for instance. And it's this amazing show that's so popular, grosses millions and millions of dollars, and everybody wants to emulate it. And everybody's like, why didn't I think of that first? And it's positively influenced the culture. It's positively influenced other people's lives. All of the individuals who work for the company, all of the people who, I don't want to get too deep into it because it's more along the lines of a cancel culture video, but sorry for the people that just listen only segment or episode. I really need to get better at that.
Yeah, we don't know what to call it.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to exclude you guys who are just listening, but to get to the root of the point, so I stop rambling. That guy obviously did positive things in his community and in the world, and you can learn a lot from him. Whatever it is, people have learned, if not directly from him, indirectly through the companies and through everything else. So,
but at the same time, you learn more from your own falter than you do from somebody else's. I mean,
sure, yeah.
There's an old joke in AA that's like, nobody quits drinking when everything's going good.
Right.
When you wake up every day, you have a solid source of income, you have your wife, you have your kids, everything's good, the sun shines all the time. You're not going to quit drinking in that circumstance. It's not until something bad happens to you, which I can attest to. Anytime something bad has happened to me, those were the greatest learning experiences for me.
I agree, but that's almost like we swerved. We like missed each other. So let's talk about that in like half a sec.
Okay.
Really quick. Dan Harmon, right? That's the guy's name. Dan Harmon. He did the weird video.
I don't even know. Like
I saw it. I watched it. Like I saw it, dude.
Is it? Or are you talking about like before Rick and Morty? He made like a Rick and Morty skit that was like.
I don't know if it was Rick and Morty skit, because I didn't actually watch the entirety of it, because as soon as I saw that thing, I was like, I'm not going to watch this anymore, and I stopped. I just like turned it off.
I didn't know about this. If there's a real video of Dan Harmon doing weird shit.
Man. Yeah, it's a real live video. It's like a decade old or something, and it's like he made this weird comedy sketch where I don't know the whole premise because I didn't finish it, but eventually you could find it on the internet. You could learn about it, read about it on Reddit. But he like pretended to have sex with like a baby doll, like rape a baby doll.
Oh my God.
Yeah, like it was awful. Like it was really distasteful.
Jeez.
But that doesn't necessarily mean he's really going to do that in reality.
Sure.
That's a whole other argument that I don't even want to get into right now, or maybe even on this channel. But like he did something awful and he got cancel culture to some degree. So can we learn from him? Like, should we not consume his material enough to learn from him anymore? I guess what I'm trying to say is like Sade, I think his name Henry de Sade, right? He was like a terrible sadist. The word sadism, Sade, comes from this person. He was a pedophile. He did like terrible things to children. He like did terrible things to children. And yet now we have this beautiful word in English called sadistic, and it can be used for all of these things. And if it weren't for that,
but it's got a negative connotation.
It's negative, but if it weren't for that like degree of thing happening in reality that we could use as a catalyst to learn from and gain wisdom about, like we shouldn't be that way, or we shouldn't learn that thing, or we shouldn't act that way. Like it gave birth to a word which allows us to define our reality in a way that we can gain wisdom from that one thing. And I guess what I'm getting at is sort of like cancel culture or Hitler. Like so many people will never read Mein Kampf. Like ever. Mein Kampf, ever. Like ever. People are like, oh, we shouldn't teach about the Holocaust in schools with all these agendas.
Meanwhile, the Jews actually are the ones who petitioned to keep Auschwitz up as a reminder.
Sort of like learning from history, right? But in the spectrum of learning from terrible people, should we learn from terrible people? In the same light of the questioning, can we or should we learn from people who don't embody their own philosophy? And like if you're like, oh, peace, love, dove, treat everybody with kindness, but then you go out and you say like fuck you to the guy who cuts you off and you flick him off immediately after recording your episode. You know what I mean? People see that, they're like, oh, I don't want to follow you.
Yep.
We kind of already tackled that one before, but now we're kind of talking about like evil people doing terrible things. Should we or should we not still try to learn from them? Can we even learn from them? I say yes, and you did too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, ultimately.
I think ultimately, even people who are evil, who don't have a philosophy that they deviate from, can be learned from. I mean, I think there's no...
You can learn from anything and everyone.
Right.
Every experience, every opportunity in life is an opportunity to learn and become better from, whether or not you're doing it from some negative experience or some positive experience. And I guess, that whole thought came from the union of opposites, like me yelling about that just a few minutes ago.
Right.
Yeah, it's always about connecting the opposites, man. So, there's one last thing that I really want to say, and then if you have any other questions, we can start wrapping it up probably. But, and really quick, man, I always feel like, I'm just going to say this now, I'm going to watch this video, listen to the audio only version of it, like in a few days from today, and I'm just going to be like, wow, we forgot to talk about so much.
Happens every time.
Or we could have dove so deep into this one thing and talked about this one thing, man, and I'm like, so many missed opportunities.
We're getting better though.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll call you and be like, "Oh, I just thought." You're like, "Nope, save it for the podcast.
Save the juice.
Come on,
save the juice, man. I got the juice, man. I gotta save it though.
Yeah.
I can't pour it all. I can't give it to him.
Should we drop a little bit?
No.
Well,
no
then
juice.
I guess what we should at least do is maybe distill a pragmatic.
Yeah, let's do that.
Something.
We'll finish with that.
Okay.
Let's finish with that.
So how can viewers...
Hold on one sec.
Yeah.
So the thing that I want to talk about, and then we can do the pragmatism.
Sure.
I think that's a really good way to end it.
Sure.
Probably. Bringing us back to union of opposites. Mm-hmm. But I guess what I'm saying... back to actual knowledge and wisdom. Back to the original question that we started talking about. Knowledge is... Man... I have this problem that I've been wrestling with for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And it's my ontology, right? It's the nature of being. Why are we here? Why are we alive on earth? Why do we have knowledge and wisdom? And what's the ultimate end, right? Everybody is talking about this. If the answer were to be found, we wouldn't be talking about things anymore. Sometimes I feel like life is a prison. I'm stuck on the prison. Mm-hmm. Prison planet Earth. Hell on earth right now, but there's heaven on earth too, and everything in between, because polarity, right?
Right.
But it's like, here's my biggest thing with knowledge and wisdom. People always, in the new age and the woo-woo, they say like, oh, this is a school, right? We come here, we reincarnate multiple times, we learn what we need to learn, then we die, and it goes to our higher self or whatever, and then we're born again if we made all the mistakes, right? Mm-hmm. I don't buy that shit. At least sometimes I don't. Like most of the time I don't. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because if it really were a school that we were meant to be inside of, to learn something to take back to ourselves, and we can talk through this on a whole nother episode. I kind of just want to bring it up really quick. Mm-hmm. If we're born with no prior knowledge of that life or those set of lives in the past or future or however the operation is, how is it a school?
Because the data couldn't be collected in an objective way.
Exactly.
If the data is streaming to something that transcends
like a collective consciousness,
then it would eliminate the purpose of us all manifesting as these individual beings if for somehow you knew the experience of every other being that had ever lived.
It just seems wasteful. I mean, and there are arguments that I can give on the opposite side of that coin because I'd like to see both spectrums. And maybe in the video where we really do this justice too.
Because we disagree. I mean, we don't disagree. We like agree and disagree, like just small degrees. But we really should unpack that more.
Should. This is actually to plug my book. I'm writing a set of 3 philosophy texts, and this is actually part like a huge section of that entire.
But a school is kind of like a prison. You can't leave except for sometimes.
It's a school and a prison and a dance club, all in one.
Yeah.
Shout outs to Holy Three Trinity.
Yep.
Nobody steal that idea from me. I'll sue you. Just kidding. I won't do that. But I might find you.
Yeah.
Because actually, it's like a whole thing. But the reason I bring it up again because like you have to record your ideas down in some medium, like some writing, some text, some audio wave form. You have on like a camera. Somehow you have to record your knowledge for other people to do the same degree of work that you had to do to get to that point in which you get to understand it and have wisdom and know. For example, I give this all the time. Like I have to burn my hand on fire to know it hurts. My son has to burn his hand on fire to know it hurts through gnosis and experience. Mm-hmm. Like I can tell him all day, don't do that, it's gonna hurt. Maybe he hurt his hand by pricking his finger on a thorn, and now he like associates that with that, but it's not the same pain.
Yeah.
But he can still use it in an objective fashion in order to like not get hurt. But
But a dog and a cat don't jump in a fire.
Right.
They know not to do it.
Right. I mean, there are levels of knowledge and genetic memory and genes and instinct. But when it comes to like the higher faculties of knowledge, when it comes to like mathematics, language, ethics, morality, like these are all higher fashions of thought, and we have to learn through our own experience. I have to read a book, I have to think about it, I have to use my own cognitive process. And I just think it's extremely wasteful, or I just really don't understand the mechanism if there were to be this singular process above us that we sort of jack into in a collective consciousness way, if it truly were a school and not a prison. Because what's the value in having every being that's born or every human that's born have to go through the same motions over and over and over and over and over and over? It doesn't seem like there's any new value to be gained out of that entire thing. It's like, okay, maybe there's some level in which like the slight variations of all of the human consciousness patterns, like your experience of touching the fire might be so similar to my experience of touching the fire, but it's different enough, just enough
to matter,
right? Or maybe not.
Or to be useful, or
to whatever the collective is, which I don't understand.
Main space type thing.
Right.
We'll definitely talk about this a lot in the Archetypes lecture series.
Sure, cool.
Well as,
We should also unpack this again in another episode. I just wanted to give it to people, just give them a taste of what's to come, because it's something I've been actually,
well, it's very in line with wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah, because ultimately, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I had a very powerful mushroom experience with Terrence McKenna's penis envy mushroom. It came straight, and I'm not advocating for drug use at all. It happened a long time ago. Don't do drugs. We're not advocating for drugs. But I gained this understanding of the difference between what knowledge is and what wisdom and experience is, and you have to record these bits of knowledge. And if my son doesn't do the same degree of work in this direction cognitively that I have, if he doesn't do the same motions, he will not arrive to the same conclusions. Mm-hmm. He's going to have his own opinions and his own feelings and his own entire thing. But there is someone out there who is going to follow in my footsteps. There are people who read Nietzsche cover to cover. There are people who love shot cover to cover, or whoever your favorite basketball player is and you want to emulate his shot and his technique, or your favorite skateboarder, whatever it is. Everyone's trying to like relive in everyone else's shoes to some degree in order to get to some level of attainment.
That's deep.
And I don't see the value in that happening over and over and over and over, minus the minor changes of scenery or flavors of your experience. Like, it just seems wasteful, and I don't see how it can be a school any other way, because we don't have that knowledge. We're not like Jack. I'm not born knowing the internet. You know what I mean? I'm not born knowing everything that there is to know.
Right.
Maybe if I was born with all the knowledge, every incarnation, I would buy into it as a school. Sometimes that's why I feel like it's a prison. But it's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day.
So I guess that leads us to our last question, and we could talk about that a little bit. So I guess the question, because it's been fun to differentiate wisdom and knowledge and talk about how they are conceptualized in different ways, and how one is better in certain situations, one is better in other situations. But I guess for the pragmatic viewer, they're going to wonder, well, what should I take away from this that I can apply in my life as it pertains to wisdom and knowledge? How can I not only accrue knowledge and wisdom in a more effective way, but how can I pass it along to others in a more effective way?
So for all the viewers and listeners out there, I mean, my best advice is to just adopt the idea that you can learn and should learn from everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, to some degree, I'm not going to learn much from like this chair, and what you decide to learn is really up to you and your will, your intellect, and your discernment. I say that almost every episode: will, intellect, discernment, and reason. Like, and values.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I don't necessarily value building a chair. I could learn building a chair if I wanted to. It's a very specific piece of knowledge. I don't really care about it, but I could. And having an openness to learning from everything, I guess, is more important than trying to learn from everything, because it's impossible. There's so much data. There's so many things occurring all around us. You couldn't possibly, like, every moment of every day be learning, but at least consciously through how we've defined, being a consciousness, knowledge, words. But I think what's important is to adopt the worldview, not even the worldview, sorry, but the idea that you should be open to learning from anything and everyone, honestly, because it truly is the truth.
Can I ask you a tough question?
Yeah.
Why would I care about learning rather than hedonistic pleasure if it's a prison?
So we should cover that on the next
episode where we talk about that. Let that be a cliffhanger then.
Truly, yeah, because that is one of the problems. So in my second book, I talk about morality and ethics, which come from the first book, which is all about the ontology and the metaphysics, and that is one of the questions. Truly, it's something I wrestle with all the time. Like, right. why not? But different day.
Okay.
Different day.
We'll just keep going.
That'll be like another hour or maybe 7, man. Right. But
gives you something to look forward to, I suppose.
Truly, yeah. But ultimately, it's just like being open to learning from other people and other sources, regardless of where it's coming from, and unifying opposites in your worldview to allow you to get to a junction in your life where you can do that, where you can set like your ego aside and be like, okay, I really disagree with this person, or I really think this person is evil, and I would like to see them burn in hell or whatever. Mm-hmm. But like, I can still learn from them. I can still distill something out of their life experience that's useful to me and to humanity, and like I can sort of alchemically transmute how I feel negatively about this thing or this person or idea in a way where it's going to actually like produce love and light, kindness, goodness, actual like value in my life. And you can do that with anything you want to, and it's really just about wanting to and being open to it. So I mean, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I guess for me, and we touched on this briefly, but I would just say that we should embrace all experience, good and bad. Because like we said, I mean, some of the most efficacious learning experiences are the negative ones. So, don't push back. If there's a situation where you have the opportunity to learn something or the opportunity to gain new wisdom, go into it with a kind of fearless mentality, whether even if the consequences might turn out to be negative.
Yeah, man.
If you feel like you'll come out, I guess you just have to comprehensively look at it and decide, is me going into this experience and diving head first, even though I know it's going to be uncomfortable, is it going to be a net positive?
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of, so I guess this is something that I missed. Shout outs what I said maybe 20 minutes ago about missing things. Mm-hmm. Happens all the time. Knowledge, we do know things, and we come to wisdoms that we don't know that we actually have, for sure. A lot. Jordan Peterson is so good at speaking in public because he's actually working out his ideas orally as he's thinking them,
right, and
like,
he says that
directly at the same time. He's like thinking and speaking and like reflecting on what he just said.
Yeah, I think I'm doing that.
Yeah,
are you?
We do that. I mean, that's stream of consciousness.
Yeah,
that's kind of like how people speak. Some do it better than others. I think it's because on the MBTI scale, like.
But I think some people show up to give a lecture and they're like, "This is what I'm going to talk about. I know exactly what it is.
Exactly.
I've known about it for years."
That's why you and I do so well together. It's our personality types.
Right.
I think you were an ENFP too, right? Like you test as ENFP.
Yep.
MBTI, shout outs, Typecast Heroes, they're going to come on the channel, but
cool.
We're both ENFPs, and that's why we're so good at this and why we jive together so well.
Right.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is Jordan Peterson does that as a technique for himself as he gives his lectures, and oftentimes he'll come to like eureka moments where you can see it, where you may have this little snippet of knowledge, this little factoid floating in your brain somewhere, and then you have this other one as well, and somehow through the act of thinking critically or talking out loud or whatever your process is, writing, doing music, like whatever it is, you're like unconsciously throwing these things back into that cauldron that I talked about earlier, and then out comes this new transcendent like other thing that maybe you never consciously put together before, but you had all of the parts and pieces to do so. And in this process, you're coming up with these new novel ideas left and right, and these are not necessarily like unearned bits of knowledge or unearned wisdoms. We should scrutinize these things a little bit. We should maybe use some scientific method. Maybe I've like, eureka, I put two things together in my head. Now maybe let me go test it to see if it's actually real out here in the physical world, if it has to do with something physical. But maybe if it has to do with something moral or something metaphysical or something inside of you or about your life experience or whatever. The reason why I'm saying that you should gain knowledge, or at least be open to gaining knowledge and wisdom from all walks of life, is because all you're doing is you're taking more and more and more in to throw in your little cauldron, to where later in life it'll slap you upside the head before you know it, because we're incredible beings and we teach ourselves things left and right that we didn't know we knew.
Well, and another way to say it too is that you might learn something today that seems arbitrary and seems like it's not applicable, but the environment around us is always shifting and slithering and turning in a way that there might come a day where it just spews out of you, and thank God that you know it, because even though you didn't anticipate that situation ever bestowing itself upon you, here it is lying right before your face.
Maybe I should have learned sorry to cut you off, bro.
No.
Maybe I should have learned how to build that chair.
Yeah.
Like I was like,
then we wouldn't have had to pay for it.
Yeah, I could have just built a chair, man. Like, come on, dude.
Like us buying these chairs was a big ordeal. Like, had we known how to build chairs?
If I could have just, if I could have built something like this,
these chairs,
they're fire. For anybody who's not watching and just listening, go check out any of our YouTube videos just to see what the chairs look like, because they're fire.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, you never know when, and I guess because you asked the question of pragmatism, you asked the question of how can I apply this or why does it matter? It's because you never know.
Right.
You never know. Like, it could be something that will save your life one day or save someone else's life, or maybe something that just puts things into perspective, that helps you get that job, or like allows you to forgive that other person because you have emotional intelligence that you gained over the course of your life because you were so open to other people that you actually changed that person's life and now they're not a piece of shit anymore. Like, you never know the impact that you have on the lives of others.
Right.
And it all starts with, we can only act from what we know, right? Oftentimes we're acting out of ignorance. I always give the metaphor that human beings are like children fumbling around in the darkness, and we're all tripping on each other and stomping on each other's feet and hurting each other on accident, falling, tripping, hurting ourselves on accident. And the only thing that we can do to ensure that that happens to a lesser degree is to gain more knowledge, shed more light on the environment, inside and outside, physically or not, and that will help us all gain the knowledge to be able to use our discernment through the wisdom gained to build a better world. And that's my entire motivation for everything that I do. So I appreciate that you asked the question of pragmatism, because it does lead into the union of opposites as an archetype or like a motif in my life and in this channel. So awesome,
well,
bro.
I appreciate your answer, my friend.
Yeah, man. I'm not a guru, though. I don't smoke cigarettes, but I'm not a guru.
But he is a rapper, though.
Shout outs to rap music and hip hop culture. But I'm white, though. How, like, come on, man. Like,
cultural appropriation, BJ.
Culture, bro. How can I know the culture, bro?
Did you learn nothing in indoctrination school?
I went to indoctrination school. The upper levels, the upper echelon.
Upper echelon of indoctrination.
Yeah, bro. Because I'm white in a suburb. And I live in Idaho.
Idaho. Yeah, that's where it's sprinkling on the cake right there.
Hey, man, it's not bad here.
It's pretty balanced. Go to Boise. Go to Freak Alley.
Boise is where it's balanced. Anywhere else in Idaho, it's all white people.
Yeah.
And Hispanic people here, because of all of the agriculture and stuff. But what do I know? I'm just a white guy who's mansplaining things to people on the internet. So,
well, we got a lot more of mansplaining
to do
for them to look forward to.
Oh, so much mansplaining.
Yeah. That's all this channel is, actually.
Is it just mansplaining?
It's just hundreds of hours of mansplaining.
Somebody out there is into it, man.
Somebody is.
Somebody's into that jive because they're open to all the knowledge.
Well, we appreciate you continuing the No, I'm just kidding.
Thanks for helping us continue our mansplaining episode.
Conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but no, for real though. Honestly, it's been a blast. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I don't really think that. I mean, although there's so much more we can unpack, like we didn't talk about all the modes of knowledge and all the epistemology, all the philosophy.
Lectures. Check out the lectures. You know, they're coming out.
Yeah, I mean, we're just having fun talking about ideas here. If anybody wants more of the meat and bones of a certain topic or concept, shout it out in the comments. Let us know. DM us, email us. Be like, hey, if you don't want to come on to the show, you just want us to talk about something in more depth because we treated it too lightly or whatever, just let us know, and we can dive into it on a lecture episode or even in another discourse where we just treat the entire episode for that one concept and we don't really jump around. So cool. Just thanks for hanging out.
All right, guys, you made it. This is the end of the video. We appreciate you sticking around for the whole thing. Feel free to follow us on Twitter at The Archive Owl or Instagram at The Archive Owl. We have a Facebook page. You can email us at thearchiveowl@gmail.com. We have a Parler now, so you can follow us on Parler. That's like the free speech social media app. There's a bunch of other places you can find us, but those are the main ones.
Find them in the description.
Yeah.
And with that, thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you for joining us and continuing the great conversation.